He promised me a fairy tale, but the castle was a cage and the king was a monster. For 40 years, I was the ghost of a girl he tried to break. But ghosts remember, they watch, they wait. And now the world will finally know the story of the man they call a saint and the porcelain doll who is about to bring his entire empire crashing down. This isn't a love story. It's the blueprint for my revenge. Make sure you follow, like, and share, because this is a story you won't want to miss. Hit that notification bell because the finale is just getting started. My name is Ava, and I am an old woman now. The face staring back at me from the polished chrome of my kettle is a stranger, her features a dense, intricate map of a life I can barely piece together. The lines around my eyes aren't from laughter. They are the faint, fossilized tracks of tears I shed in another lifetime. My hands, spotted and thin, tremble as I pour the hot water. But it's not from age. It's the tremor of a memory resurfacing, a ghost rattling its chains. Today, I remember. I allow the floodgates to open, and the torrent of the past rushes in, threatening to drown me all over again. I remember Havenwood, Oregon. A town so impossibly picturesque it felt like a movie set, nestled in a valley where the mist clung to the pines like a lover's embrace. The air smelled of damp earth, sawdust, and the distant promise of rain. It was a town built on old money and older secrets. And I remember Liam Thorne. Just saying his name, even now, feels like pressing on a bruise that never healed. Our love story was the kind whispered about in the town's only diner, the kind that filled the pages of romance novels. He was the golden heir to the Thorne logging fortune, his future as vast and green as the forests his family owned, and I was the girl from the other side of the tracks, literally. My father, a good man worn down by hard labor, worked at the Thorne mill. Our house was small, filled with the scent of my mother's baking and the constant, low-level hum of financial worry. Liam saw me at the annual Founders' Day picnic. I was serving lemonade, my dress was a hand-me-down, and my hair was a wild mess of curls I couldn't tame. He walked right past the daughters of the town's other prominent families, his eyes, the color of a summer sky, landing on me. He didn't see a charity case. He saw me. He said he saw a wildflower growing in a field of carefully cultivated roses. Our courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments. We'd drive his vintage convertible up to the scenic overlook, the wind whipping through my hair as we watched the sunset paint the valley in hues of orange and purple. He'd bring me books of poetry, reading them aloud in a low, earnest voice that made my heart ache. He made me feel seen, cherished, beautiful. He was my first everything. The inevitable day came when he said the words that both thrilled and terrified me. I want you to meet my father. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a man. He was an institution in Havenwood. His name was on the library, the hospital wing, the park benches. He was a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. When Liam's car crunched up the long, winding gravel driveway to the Thorne mansion, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a grand Victorian monolith that loomed over the town, its windows like 100 watchful eyes. Inside, it was a museum of wealth and power. Dark wood paneling, floors so polished you could see your reflection, and walls lined with the oil-painted portraits of stern-faced ancestors, all of them with Liam's sky-blue eyes. Then, Marcus Thorne appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He was older than I expected, but his presence filled the cavernous hall. He had the same handsome features as Liam, but where Liam's were softened by youthful optimism, Marcus's were sharpened by a lifetime of command. His charm was a physical force, a warm, enveloping wave that pulled you in. He descended the stairs, his eyes never leaving mine, a smile playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. So, he said, his voice a rich, smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. This is the young lady who has so completely captured my son's heart. He took my hand, his grip firm and cool, and lifted it to his lips. It was a gesture straight out of a classic film, but it felt rehearsed, calculated. Marcus Thorne. It is an absolute pleasure. He held my gaze for a moment too long, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Liam has told me so much about you, Ava. That evening, over a dinner served by silent uniformed staff, he regaled us with stories of his business triumphs and his charitable works. He asked me about my life, my family, my dreams, but it felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation cloaked in politeness. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if he were cataloging my weaknesses. Later, as we stood in the vast drawing room, a fireplace crackling beside us, he gestured to a glass cabinet filled with delicate antique figurines. "Aren't they exquisite?" he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "So perfectly crafted, so fragile." He turned to me, his smile widening. "You remind me of them, Ava, my beautiful little porcelain doll." Liam, standing beside me, beamed with pride, squeezing my hand. He heard a compliment, a term of endearment. I heard it too, but underneath the silken words, I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. I didn't realize then what it meant. I didn't realize that dolls aren't meant to have their own lives. They are meant to be placed on a shelf, admired, controlled. And when their owner grows tired of them, they are easily broken. That grand house, with its dead ancestors watching from the walls, wasn't a home. It was his display case, and I was his newest, most prized acquisition. The fairy tale began to splinter, not in a great dramatic shattering, but in a series of tiny, almost imperceptible fissures. The illusion of a perfect future cracked under the steady, relentless pressure of Marcus Thorne's influence. It started with things so small, so seemingly insignificant, that to protest would have made me seem paranoid, ungrateful. His hand, for instance. At family dinners or public events, his hand would find the small of my back, a gesture that appeared paternal and supportive to any onlooker. But it would linger a fraction of a second too long, his fingers pressing with a proprietary firmness that sent a jolt of discomfort through me. Or he'd brush a stray strand of hair from my face, his knuckles grazing my cheek in a way that felt less like a kind gesture and more like an assessment of property. When I would subtly shift away, he would just smile, a knowing, condescending little smirk, as if my discomfort was a source of private amusement. Then came the comments, always delivered with that same paternal smile, a weapon disguised as affection. I'd spent a week's wages on a new dress for a charity gala, a simple but elegant navy blue gown. When I arrived at the Thorne mansion, Marcus looked me up and down, his gaze clinical. "That color is a bit severe for you, my dear," he said, his voice laced with false concern. "You should be in pastels, something to highlight your delicate features. Don't you agree, Liam?" Liam, ever eager for his father's approval, would nod enthusiastically. "Dad's right, Ava. You'd look amazing in pink or baby blue." My own taste, my own identity, was being subtly erased and repainted in the colors Marcus deemed appropriate for his porcelain doll. My ambitions were the next to be targeted. I had spoken to Liam about wanting to take some classes at the community college, maybe in business administration. I dreamed of one day helping my father manage his own small woodworking shop, to be more than just a wife. When I mentioned this over dinner, Marcus let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. "A woman with a head for numbers," he mused, swirling the wine in his glass. He looked at Liam, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Don't you worry your pretty little head with such things, Ava. You're a homebody at heart. Your place is here, creating a beautiful, warm environment for my son." I tried to talk to Liam about it, my voice trembling with a frustration I couldn't quite articulate. "Doesn't it bother you?" I'd ask, late at night in the privacy of his car. "The way he talks about me, like I'm an object, something to be managed?" Liam would sigh, running a hand through his perfect hair, his brow furrowed with confusion, not concern. "Ava, you're being too sensitive. That's just Dad. He's old-fashioned. He just wants to take care of you, to protect you. He wants the best for us." He didn't see the manipulation. He saw a father's love. He couldn't comprehend that the protection his father offered was the kind a zookeeper offers his prize exhibit, ensuring its cage is secure and its spirit is tamed. The blindness was absolute, a testament to the decades Marcus had spent conditioning his own son. Liam's adoration for his father was a shield Marcus used against me, deflecting any and all of my concerns. Slowly, methodically, Marcus began to engineer my isolation. My friends, the girls I had grown up with, were deemed a bad influence. My best friend Sarah, who worked at the diner and had a sharp, cynical wit, was the first to go. After meeting her once, Marcus commented to Liam, "That friend of hers, she has a very coarse way about her, not the kind of person a future Mrs. Thorne should associate with." Soon, Liam was always busy when I suggested we meet Sarah. He'd make excuses, suggest other activities, until the invitations from my end dwindled into an embarrassed silence. The phone calls became less frequent, the distance growing until it was an unbridgeable chasm. He even managed to turn my own family into unwitting wardens. My father, a proud man who had worked at the Thorne Mill his entire life, was promoted to a less strenuous, higher-paying supervisory role. It was a gift we couldn't refuse, a golden leash. Shortly after, Marcus had a friendly chat with him. My father later relayed the conversation to me, his eyes filled with a gratitude that made my stomach churn. "Mr. Thorne is so concerned for you, Ava," he'd said. "He thinks the stress of the city is too much for a delicate girl like you. He wants me to make sure you stay close to home, here in Havenwood, where you can be looked after." The cage was being built, bar by gilded bar, not just with Marcus's power, but with Liam's blindness and my own family's coerced complicity. The grand house, once a symbol of a future I'd only dreamed of, now felt suffocating. The portraits of the dead Thornes no longer looked stern, they looked smug. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall no longer measured time. It measured the seconds of my freedom, slipping away, one by one. The walls, once symbols of my bright future, were closing in, their opulent wallpaper feeling like the bars of a cage. The flimsy pretense of paternal affection didn't just crack, it was obliterated. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Liam was in Portland for a business meeting, and the house was unnaturally quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window panes. I had sought refuge in the library, a vast, two-story room lined with thousands of leather-bound books that smelled of dust and secrets. I was tracing the spine of a worn copy of Wuthering Heights when the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me. I turned, and my heart seized in my chest. Marcus stood there, not smiling. The mask of the charming philanthropist was gone, and for the first time, I saw the man underneath. His eyes, usually crinkling with feigned warmth, were flat and cold, like chips of ice. The air in the room grew thick, heavy. This was not the respected town benefactor. This was a predator. "We've never had a chance to talk, you and I," he said, his voice a low, menacing purr that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. "Not really." He began to walk towards me, his steps slow and deliberate, the sound of his expensive leather shoes echoing on the polished hardwood floor. I backed away instinctively, my hand flying to my throat, until the edge of a massive mahogany desk pressed into my spine. I was trapped. "You're a very clever girl, Ava," he continued, stopping just a few feet away. "Coming here from your little shack, dazzling my boy with those wide, innocent eyes. A masterful performance." The charm was now laced with a venomous sarcasm. "But the performance is over." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let's talk about your father. That new position at the mill. Very comfortable, isn't it? A man his age, with his health. It would be a tragedy if the company had to downsize. A real tragedy." The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. My family's livelihood, their home, everything they had, was in his hands. He owned us. He owned me. "And your sweet mother," he mused, tapping a finger against his chin. "Her heart condition. The medical bills must be astronomical. Good thing the Thorne Industries insurance plan is so comprehensive. It would be a shame to lose that." That was the moment the true abuse began. It wasn't a single act of violence, but a systematic soul-crushing campaign of terror. It was the way he would corner me in hallways, his body blocking my path, his presence, a suffocating weight. It was the accidental brushes against my body that were anything but. It was the whispered threats, delivered with a smile, if a maid walked by, that detailed the ruin he could bring upon everyone I loved with a single phone call. He was meticulous, a true artist of cruelty. He never left a mark on my skin. The bruises were all on the inside, a deep, festering purple on my soul. He understood that physical evidence could be seen, could be questioned, but psychological torment. That was a wound only I could feel, a silent scream no one else could hear. He orchestrated it all with chilling precision, ensuring I was always alone, always vulnerable. He turned the house I was trapped in into his personal hunting ground. He was the architect of my fear, and he delighted in his creation. Worst of all, he made me a co-conspirator in my own violation. He would follow the abuse with whispers that poisoned my mind, twisting my shame into a weapon against me. "Who would ever believe you?" he'd hiss, his breath hot against my ear. The little gold digger from the wrong side of town, accusing Marcus Thorne, the man who built this city. They would laugh you out of the police station. He would call me pathetic, manipulative, mentally unstable, planting the seeds of doubt in my own mind. "You wanted this," he'd whisper after an assault. "You know you did. A girl like you, throwing yourself at my son. You were begging for it." He draped my silence in a thick, suffocating blanket of shame. I was not just a victim. I was, in his narrative, a guilty party. The fear of him was matched only by the shame he expertly cultivated within me. I began to look in the mirror and see what he told me I was: cheap, conniving, and worthless. The bright, hopeful girl who had fallen in love with Liam was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, until all that was left was a hollow, terrified shell. I was his porcelain doll, and he was taking great pleasure in creating the first cracks. The 2 faint pink lines on the pregnancy test felt like a death sentence, and paradoxically, a desperate final hope. They appeared in the sterile silence of the grand bathroom, the one with the clawfoot tub and the gold-plated faucets. I stared at the plastic stick in my trembling hand, and the world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. A child. A life was growing inside me, a life conceived in violation and terror. A sob caught in my throat, a ragged, ugly sound. This child was a secret I couldn't keep, a physical manifestation of Marcus's monstrous crime. For weeks, I had been drowning in a silent sea of shame, but this was a life raft, a terrible, horrifying life raft. This, I thought, would be the catalyst. This had to be the truth that Liam could not deny. A baby, his father's grandchild, born of such a brutal betrayal. He would have to see. He would have to believe me. I found him in the rose garden, the one his mother had cultivated before she passed away. He was pruning the bushes, a look of serene concentration on his handsome face. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow around him, making him look like an angel. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I stood there for a moment, clutching the pregnancy test in my pocket like a talisman, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break free. "Liam," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned, a bright, easy smile spreading across his face when he saw me. "Ava, there you are. I was just finishing up." That smile, the one that used to make my world right, now felt like a dagger. I couldn't smile back. The words tumbled out of me in a frantic, choked rush, a torrent of confession I had held back for so long. "Liam, I have to tell you something. Something terrible." His smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. "What is it? Are you okay?" I shook my head, tears blurring my vision. No, I'm not okay." I took a deep breath, the scent of roses thick and cloying. "It's your father, Liam. It's Marcus." I laid it all bare. The threats against my family, the way he cornered me, the calculated touches, the whispers, the assaults. I told him everything, my voice cracking, my hands shaking so violently I had to clasp them together. I told him the name of the monster who wasn't his father, but my rapist. And then, the final devastating blow. I pulled the test from my pocket and held it out to him. "I'm pregnant, Liam. And it's his." I watched the color drain from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, pale shade. His sky-blue eyes, once so full of love, were now wide with a horror I couldn't decipher. He stared at the test, then at my face, then back at the test. He didn't speak. He just shook his head, a small, jerky movement, as if trying to dislodge a thought too monstrous to contemplate. Then, without a word to me, he turned and stormed into the house. I was left alone in the garden, the roses suddenly looking like bloody, clenched fists. I waited. I waited for what felt like an eternity, an entire lifetime. I prayed. I prayed that my Liam, the boy who read me poetry, the boy who called me a wildflower, would emerge my savior. I imagined him confronting his father, the truth finally dawning on him, his love for me conquering the years of manipulation. I imagined him running back out to me, wrapping me in his arms, and taking me away from this house of horrors forever. When the back door finally opened, I looked up with a heart full of fragile hope. But the man who came back out was not my Liam. His face, once open and kind, was now a mask of cold, unforgiving fury. His eyes were glacial. He walked towards me, his steps heavy with judgment. "How could you?" he hissed, his voice low and guttural, a sound I had never heard from him before. My hope shattered into a million tiny pieces. "What?" I whispered, my voice gone. "Liam, what are you talking about?" He stopped in front of me, looking down at me as if I were something vile he had found on the bottom of his shoe. "My father told me. He told me everything. How you've been unstable. How you've been making things up, seeking attention. How you came on to him." The words were like physical blows knocking the air from my lungs. "He warned me you might do something like this, making up these disgusting, vicious lies to trap me, to secure your position. A baby? Is that your final, pathetic play?" He chose him. He had listened to the monster and believed every poisonous word. The man I loved, the future I had dreamed of, it all died in that moment, in that sickeningly beautiful rose garden. The boy who stood before me, his face twisted with contempt, was no longer my savior. He was my enemy, and I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. The whispers of Havenwood followed me long after the town itself was a memory in the dusty rearview mirror of a cross-country bus. They were the real chains, heavier than any iron. Hysterical, manipulative. A liar. The words crafted by Marcus and parroted by Liam became my new identity. In a place where the thorn name was scripture, their gospel was truth, and I was the serpent in their Eden. The bus engine groaned, a mournful sound that echoed the hollowness hollowing me out from the inside. Each mile was a nail hammered into the coffin of the girl I used to be. I clutched my stomach, a subconscious gesture of protection. There was a secret there, a tiny fluttering life that was both my only hope and my greatest terror. The world outside the grimy window became a blur of anonymous towns and unforgiving landscapes, a reflection of my own erased future. I fled not just from a town, but from a story that had been written for me, a narrative of my own villainy. With no money, no allies, and a name I could no longer use, I became a ghost. I learned the art of invisibility in the sprawling, indifferent anonymity of the city. I found a room in a building that smelled of damp and despair, a place where no one asked questions, because no one cared about the answers. My days were a monotonous cycle of survival. I washed dishes in a greasy spoon diner, the steam scalding my face, the clatter of plates a constant jarring symphony. I scrubbed floors in office buildings late at night, my reflection in the polished marble a stranger's, her eyes vacant, her shoulders permanently slumped. The life inside me grew, a silent companion in my profound loneliness. I would talk to her in the dead of night, my voice a hoarse whisper in the tiny, cold room. I'd tell her about the sky in Havenwood, how blue it was before the clouds rolled in. I'd tell her about the scent of her grandmother's baking, a memory so pure it felt like a dream. I never spoke of Marcus. I never spoke of Liam. I would not taint her with their poison, not even in the sanctuary of the womb. She was my secret garden, the one part of my world they hadn't scorched. But with her growth came a rising panic. How could I protect her? How could I raise a child in this world of shadows, always looking over my shoulder, always one step away from destitution? To bring her into my life would be to tether her to my curse. The thorn name, their power, had long arms. They would find me, and if they did, they would find her. They would either take her or destroy her, another porcelain doll for them to display or shatter. The day she was born, the world, for a brief, brilliant moment, regained its color. She was perfect, a tiny, perfect creature with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. I held her, my heart breaking and healing all at once. I breathed in her scent, the pure, untainted smell of new life. In that sterile hospital room, I named her, a name I would speak only in my heart, a secret treasure I would keep forever. Sarah, my Sarah. The social worker was a kind woman with tired eyes who had seen too much of the world's sorrow. She didn't press for details I couldn't give. She just saw a young woman with no resources, no family, and a look of primal fear in her eyes. She spoke of stable homes, of loving parents, of opportunities I could never provide. Every word was a razor blade, slicing away at my resolve. Giving her up wasn't a choice. It was a surgery, an amputation of my own soul to save the rest of me from gangrene. The memory of signing the papers is seared into my mind. The crisp, impersonal weight of the document, the scratch of the cheap pen. My hand trembled so violently I could barely form the letters of the false name I had been using. It was a signature of surrender, a final, damning betrayal. A betrayal born not of malice, but of a desperate, ferocious love. I was protecting her from me, from the ghost of Havenwood, from the men who had broken her mother. I walked out of that hospital with empty arms and a cavern where my heart used to be. The second betrayal was complete. The first had taken my past. The second had stolen my future. The decades that followed weren't lived. They were endured. A long, gray winter of the soul. I moved from city to city, job to job, a tumbleweed of a person. I was a cashier, a factory worker, a hotel maid. I learned to keep my head down, to make no friends, to build no attachments. Attachments were vulnerabilities. They were anchors that could drag you down. I buried Ava deep, so deep I sometimes forgot she ever existed. She was a girl in a storybook, a naive child who believed in fairy tales. I was someone else, a shell. But at night, in the quiet darkness of whatever cheap room I was renting, her ghost would return. She would whisper of lost love, of shattered dreams, of a baby's cry in an empty room. I learned to live with the haunting. It was the price of survival. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight that settled in my bones and never left. Time didn't heal the wound. It just turned it into a scar so vast, it covered my entire being. The years sanded me down, smoothing my edges, erasing my features, until I was just another anonymous face in the crowd. I learned to find a strange sort of peace in the invisibility. No one saw me, so no one could hurt me. I existed in the margins, in the quiet hum of a life unobserved. Then came the evening that changed everything. The public library was my sanctuary, a place of warmth and silence where I could lose myself for a few hours without spending a dime. I was scrolling idly through a national news website on one of the public computers. The click of the mouse, a soft counterpoint to the gentle rustle of turning pages around me. And then I saw him. The face was older, etched with lines of authority and what the world mistook for wisdom. But the eyes were the same. The cold, reptilian eyes of a predator. Marcus Thorne. He was beaming, his teeth a flash of predatory white. He was holding a pair of oversized scissors, cutting a large crimson ribbon. The headline read, "Philanthropist Marcus Thorne, heralded as community saint at dedication of new hospital wing." I clicked on the article. My hand was steady, unnaturally so. The words swam before my eyes, a litany of praise that was so obscene, so profoundly false, it felt like a physical assault. A pillar of the community, a titan of industry with a heart of gold, a man whose generosity knows no bounds. They quoted dignitaries, doctors, even patients, all singing the praises of the great Marcus Thorne, the man who had funded the new pediatric oncology unit. A unit for sick children. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, tectonic shift. The rage I had meticulously suppressed for half a lifetime, the anger I had buried under layers of shame and survival, erupted. But it wasn't the hot, screaming fury of the young girl he had destroyed. This was something else. It was a cold, pure, clarifying fire. It burned away the fog of decades, the numbness, the grief. In the sterile silence of that library, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, the victim I had been for so long drew her last breath. She crumpled into dust, and from her ashes, something new and terrible and strong rose to take her place, a strategist. I stared at his smiling face on the screen, and I no longer saw the monster who haunted my nightmares. I saw a target. I saw a man draped in the armor of public perception, a man whose greatest strength was his reputation. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that his greatest strength would be the instrument of his ruin. The goal was no longer to simply survive him. It was no longer about some abstract notion of justice, a quiet confession that would be dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman. No, justice was a courtroom term. This was bigger. This was about deconstruction. I would not just expose him. I would dismantle him. I would take everything he had built, everything he valued, his name, his empire, his legacy, and I would turn it to ash. I would orchestrate his complete and utter ruin, and I would do it with the same meticulous, patient cruelty he had shown me. The long winter was over. A new season was about to begin. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a coherent strategy yet, but as a series of images. A web, intricate and nearly invisible, with Marcus at its center. I would not be the fly this time. I would be the spider. I spent weeks in that library, using their computers to become a ghost in the machine. I researched everything about him, his businesses, his charities, his known associates, his political donations. And the public image of Marcus Thorne was a fortress, seemingly impenetrable, but every fortress has cracks. You just have to know where to look. I was beginning to learn. Then, the letter arrived. It came to the small post office box I'd maintained for years, a lifeline to a world I otherwise avoided. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, embossed with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. It felt alien in my hands, official and impersonal. My first thought was that they had found me, that Marcus, after all these years, had somehow tracked me down. A sliver of the old fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my newfound resolve. I slid it open with a trembling finger. The words were stark, stripped of all emotion. Legalese. It is our sad duty to inform you regarding the estate of the late Sarah Miller. Passed away following a brief illness. Sarah. My Sarah. The name I had only ever whispered to myself in the dark. The world tilted. The air in my small room seemed to thin, and a roaring sound filled my ears. Grief, sudden and absolute, was a physical blow. It knocked the breath from my lungs, buckled my knees. I slid down the wall to the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. How can you grieve for someone you never knew? But I did. I grieved for the baby I held for only a few hours. I grieved for the little girl whose first steps I never saw, for the teenager whose heartbreaks I never soothed, for the woman she had become without me. I grieved for all the stolen moments, the unlived life we should have had together. I sat there for hours, lost in a sea of sorrow and guilt. The guilt was the worst part. It was a suffocating wave, telling me I had no right to this pain. I had abandoned her. I had signed her away. My grief felt like a stolen thing, something I hadn't earned. Eventually, my eyes focused back on the letter, on the lines I had skimmed over in my initial shock. Mizzy. Miller's last will and testament designated you as a person to be contacted. She is survived by one child, her daughter, Eleanor Vance. Miss Vance has expressed a strong desire to make contact with her maternal grandmother, my granddaughter. Eleanor. A person, a name, a life that had sprung from the one I had given away. My first, overwhelming instinct was to burn the letter, to erase this too, to retreat back into my fortress of invisibility. The guilt was a screaming chorus in my head. What right did I have to walk into this girl's life? I was a ghost, a poison. I had abandoned her mother. What could I possibly offer her but a legacy of pain, and shame. I would taint her, just as I had feared tainting Sarah. I had to protect her, and the best way to protect her was to stay away. I reached for the book of matches on my small kitchenette counter. The fire would be a clean ending. It would turn this devastating new reality into ash, just like I planned to do to Marcus. But as my fingers closed around the matchbook, another thought, the voice of the strategist born in the library, cut through the noise. It was sharp, clear, and cold. This is not a ghost from your past, come to haunt you. The thought was so clear, it was almost a voice. This is a soldier for your future. I stopped. My hand froze. A soldier. The word resonated, with the new purpose hardening inside me. I looked at the letter again, not as a harbinger of guilt, but as a piece of intelligence, an unexpected asset. This girl, Eleanor, was not just a reminder of my failure. She was a connection. She was blood, and she was a part of the family Marcus Thorne had tried to erase. The plan, which had been an abstract concept of fire and ruin, suddenly had a new potential component, a living, breathing piece of the puzzle. The fear didn't vanish, but it was overshadowed by a cold, thrilling calculation. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward, the potential for a vengeance so complete, so poetic, it was undeniable. I put the matches down. The long winter had brought a deep, killing frost, but now a single seed, dormant for decades, was threatening to crack the frozen ground. I agreed to meet her. The correspondence was handled through the law firm, a sterile and safe intermediary. We chose a neutral location, a quiet, independent coffee shop halfway between her city and mine. A place with no memories, no ghosts. I arrived early, sitting in a corner booth where I could see the door. My hands were wrapped around a mug of black coffee I had no intention of drinking. Every part of me was screaming to run. This was a mistake, a selfish, dangerous indulgence. Then she walked in. I knew it was her instantly. She had her mother's eyes, my eyes, the same deep, thoughtful shade of gray. But where my gaze had been trained to be downcast and avoidant, hers was direct, observant, scanning the room with a quick, intelligent curiosity. She was tall and lean, dressed in practical jeans and a dark jacket, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. There was a strength in her posture, a confidence that I had never been allowed to possess. She carried a laptop bag slung over her shoulder like it was a part of her. She was a modern woman, a woman of a world I barely recognized. Our eyes met across the room. There was a flicker of recognition, a questioning tilt of her head. I gave a small, hesitant nod. She navigated the tables and slid into the booth opposite me. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The air was thick with unspoken decades, with the lives of 3 women intersecting in the steam of cooling coffee. "Ava?" she asked. Her voice was steady, lower than I expected. I could only nod again, my own voice trapped in my throat. "I'm Eleanor," she said, stating the obvious, but filling the silence. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for looking for me," I finally managed to say. The words felt inadequate, hollow. The small talk was awkward, stilted. She asked about my trip. I asked about her work. She told me she was a freelance journalist. "Digital forensics mostly," she explained. "I follow the money. I find the things people try to delete. It's amazing what you can uncover when you know how to look." There was an opening, a chance to steer the conversation. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I had to do this carefully. I couldn't unload a lifetime of trauma onto this practical, intelligent stranger. I had to test the waters, to see what she already knew, what she suspected. "My mother," Eleanor began, her gaze dropping to her own cup. She didn't talk much about her past, about her adoption. I got the feeling it was a closed door. But after she passed, I started digging. I'm a journalist. It's what I do. I wanted to know where I came from. "And what did you find?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Dead ends," she said, frustration coloring her tone. "Mostly. I traced my mother's adoption back to this state, but the records are sealed tight. Then I started looking at the periphery. any prominent families in the region around the time of her birth, any big news, and one name kept coming up over and over again. Thorne, the Thorne family of Havenwood. The name hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. My carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. They seemed perfect, Eleanor continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, the journalist in her taking over. Too perfect. The family patriarch, Marcus Thorne, has this pristine, saintly public image. But when you dig, it's all curated. It's a fortress of public relations. Financial records that lead to shell corporations that loop back on themselves. Stories of business rivals who just disappeared. Whispers. Nothing concrete, just a feeling. A feeling that deep down, something is rotten. She looked up, her gray eyes locking onto mine. My mother was born in the shadow of that town, of that family. And then she was given away. I can't shake the feeling that the two things are connected. This was it. The moment of truth. My carefully rehearsed partial confession felt clumsy on my tongue. The strategist in me warred with the terrified grandmother. "Your instincts are right," I said, my voice low and firm. I had her attention completely now. The Thornes, Marcus Thorne, is not the man the world thinks he is. He is a corrupt, cruel man. He wronged our family. Deeply. He took everything from me. He's the reason your mother had to be given away. I did it to protect her from him. I watched her face, bracing for the shock, the disbelief, the pity. I got none of them. Her expression hardened, not with surprise, but with confirmation. It was the look of a person who had suspected a terrible truth and was finally hearing it spoken aloud. The puzzle pieces of her own investigation clicked into place. She leaned forward slightly, her hands flat on the table, her entire being focused on me with a terrifying intensity. She didn't ask what he did. She didn't ask for the details of the past. She asked a simple, chilling question that sealed our future. How do we burn him to the ground? I looked at my granddaughter, this brilliant, fierce young woman who was a stranger and yet, inexplicably, family, a soldier, indeed. The cold coffee sat untouched between us. Over it, a pact was sealed, an alliance between a ghost and a hacker, a promise of fire and ruin. A quiet smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of grim, absolute certainty. "I'm so glad you asked," I said, "because I have a few ideas." Our revenge was never going to be an explosion. It was a slow, creeping rot from within. An art form sculpted not from clay or marble, but from data and memory. While Eleanor, my ghost, my soldier, plunged into the digital abyss of Marcus Thorne's life, I descended into the catacombs of my own past. The command center for our war was a small, anonymous apartment overlooking a city that didn't know our names. The walls were covered in whiteboards, a chaotic tapestry of names, account numbers, and timelines. One side was Eleanor's domain, a spiderweb of IP addresses and shell corporations. The other side was mine, a map of a single, corrupted soul, Marcus. He once threw a crystal glass against a fireplace because a business associate used the word decent to describe his new acquisition, I told Eleanor one night, my voice low, the memory as clear as the day it happened. He said, "Decent is what you call a peasant's meal. My things are magnificent, or they are nothing." Eleanor didn't look up from her laptop, but her fingers paused on the keyboard. Magnificent, got it. So his vanity isn't just a trait, it's a load-bearing wall. It's the entire foundation, I confirmed. He doesn't fear poverty, he fears mediocrity. He doesn't fear exposure, he fears being seen as ordinary, as a fraud. We don't just show the world he's a criminal. We have to show them he's small. And so, we built our blueprint. Eleanor was the architect, I was the psychologist. She traced the flow of money, a river of poison that snaked from his so-called charities through a labyrinth of offshore accounts in jurisdictions whose names sounded like spells. It was a masterpiece of deception, millions laundered through galas for sick children, fundraisers for the homeless. He wasn't just hiding money, he was washing his soul with the good intentions of others. "Here," she said, pointing to a name on the screen. A holding company in the Caymans, Seraphim Investments. Angelic, isn't it? It's the primary basin for at least 3 of his philanthropic ventures. Seraphim, I whispered, the name a bitter irony on my tongue. He always did see himself as a god. While she mapped his financial sins, I mapped his psyche. I resurrected every dismissive comment, every veiled threat, every moment of casual cruelty. I remembered his paranoia about loyalty, how he would test his employees with planted rumors. I remembered his morbid fear of illness and aging, how he'd fire anyone who coughed in his presence. I remembered the fragile shell of his ego, how it would crack at the slightest hint of disrespect. These weren't just painful memories anymore. They were weapons. Each one was a perfectly crafted key designed to unlock a specific room of his personal hell. He believes he's invincible because he's insulated by wealth and reputation, I explained, pacing the small room. But that insulation is also a soundproof chamber. If we can get a whisper inside, it will echo until it becomes a scream. Our plan wasn't just to present evidence. It was to deconstruct a man, piece by piece, using his own tools. We would make his strength, his meticulous control, his greatest vulnerability. We would turn his fortress into a prison, and we would do it so quietly that he wouldn't hear the lock turn until it was too late. He had built a myth around himself, the benevolent patriarch of Havenwood. We weren't just going to topple the statue. We were going to grind it into dust and scatter the ashes. The first whisper was an act of digital scripture. Eleanor, cloaked in layers of virtual private networks and routed through servers in 3 different continents, crafted an anonymous email. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, sterile tip. It went to a mid-level, ambitious agent at the Internal Revenue Service, someone Eleanor had identified as being hungry for a career-making case. The email contained a single string of numbers, the account for Seraphim Investments, and a short, cryptic message. Look into the angel's share. Sometimes charity begins offshore. Nothing more. No threats, no demands. Just a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of federal bureaucracy. We watched from our digital perch as the seed took root. We saw the electronic ripples, subpoenas being drafted, internal inquiries launched. It was silent, invisible to the outside world, but we knew the first crack had appeared in the foundation. Then came the psychological front. I remembered Marcus's loathing for his primary business rival, a man named Julian Croft, whom Marcus considered old money and inbred. Eleanor, using a burner phone and a voice modulator that made her sound like a disgruntled male employee, left a message for Croft. It was just a fragment, hinting at financial instability within the Thorn Empire. "He's moving assets," the distorted voice rasped. "Shuffling the deck before the house of cards comes down. Check the third quarter acquisitions. The numbers are soft." The next phase was more direct, more personal. We targeted Marcus's sanctum. Eleanor set up a series of automated calls to his private office line. They came at odd hours, late at night, early in the morning. When he answered, there was no voice, only a low, humming static, occasionally punctuated by a sound I had chosen myself, the faint, distorted echo of a lullaby, the same one my mother used to sing to me. It was a sound from a life he had tried to erase. I imagined him sitting in his leather chair, the skyline of Havenwood glittering outside his window, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He would answer, expecting a subordinate or a mistress, and he would be met with this ghost of a sound, this nothingness that held everything. He would hang up, his heart beating a little faster. He would tell himself it was a crossed line, a technical glitch. But the next night, it would happen again, and again. The calls were relentless, a form of electronic water torture. Then, I sent my own message. It took me a week to find the right one. I scoured online antique shops and obscure collector sites until I found it. A porcelain doll from the early 20th century. It was beautiful, with delicate, hand-painted features and a lace dress, and a single, fine crack running from its temple to its jawline. I packed it myself in an unmarked cardboard box, cushioned with plain brown paper. I sent it via a third-party courier service with no return address to his corporate headquarters. I pictured the moment his secretary brought the box in, his curiosity, then his annoyance at an unsolicited package. I saw him slitting the tape with a silver letter opener, I saw him lifting the doll from the box. For anyone else, it would be a strange, perhaps unsettling, gift. For Marcus, it was a declaration of war. It was the name he had given me. My little porcelain doll. Beautiful. Fragile. An object to be owned and displayed. Now that doll was back and it was broken. It was a message that said, "I remember, and I am not as fragile as you thought." We saw the effects almost immediately. Eleanor, monitoring his internal corporate communications, saw a flurry of emails about security breaches. He hired a private firm to sweep his office for listening devices. They found nothing. He changed his private number, but the static lullaby found its way to his new one. He became short-tempered in meetings. He accused his inner circle of leaking information to Julian Croft. His carefully curated world, once a symphony of control, was now filled with discordant notes of suspicion. His paranoia, a fire we had gently stoked, was beginning to burn out of control. He was searching for a ghost, a shadowy enemy plotting his downfall, never once imagining it was the girl he had thrown away decades ago. He was being haunted, and we were the ones holding the sheet. The whispers had done their work. The foundations of his empire were trembling, shaken by invisible hands. Julian Croft had started a hostile takeover bid, fueled by the rumors of financial weakness. The IRS investigation was quietly escalating, a python slowly tightening its coils. Marcus was stretched thin, his paranoia turning him against his own allies. It was time to stop whispering and show him a face. It was time for my move. For decades, I had lived in the shadows, saving every penny, investing wisely, transforming the pittance I had fled with into a modest but effective war chest. Now, I used it to create a new identity. I became Alana Reese, a discreet, successful venture capitalist from out of state, specializing in restructuring distressed assets. My hair was cut short and styled into a severe, elegant silver sweep. I wore bespoke suits of charcoal gray and navy blue. My voice, once soft and hesitant, was now low and measured, each word chosen with surgical precision. The terrified girl was buried so deep, even I could barely remember her. In her place stood a woman of steel and ice. As Alana Reese, I reached out to the Thorn Corporation, expressing interest in a strategic investment. With the company weakened by the takeover attempt and internal chaos, they were desperate for a lifeline. The meeting was scheduled not with Marcus, he was too embroiled in his own battles, but with his heir apparent, the COO, Liam. I walked into the Thorn Tower, a place I hadn't set foot in for over 30 years. The lobby was different, more modern, but the air was the same, thin and cold, smelling of money and arrogance. Liam's office was on the top floor, a smaller version of his father's, with the same panoramic view of the city he believed he owned. He stood up when I entered. The years had not been kind. The golden boy I had loved was gone. In his place was a pale, tired man in an expensive suit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was thinning, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was a hollowed-out imitation of his father, wearing his power like an ill-fitting coat. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. He saw Alana Reese, a potential savior. He saw a portfolio, a solution. He saw money. He didn't see the ghost of the girl whose heart he had helped his father shatter. "Miss Reese," he said, extending a clammy hand. "Thank you for coming. Liam Thorn." "Mr. Thorn," I replied, my voice perfectly even. I let my hand linger in his, just a moment too long, my grip firm. "The pleasure is mine." We sat down at a large glass table. He launched into a polished but strained presentation, full of corporate jargon about synergy and leveraging assets. I let him talk, my eyes never leaving his face. I was studying him, cataloging the subtle tics of anxiety, the way he repeatedly adjusted his tie, the slight tremor in his hand as he sipped his water. "Your company is facing significant challenges, Mr. Thorn," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. My tone was not accusatory, merely factual. A hostile takeover bid, rumors of financial irregularities. It seems the foundations are unstable. He flinched at the word unstable. "We're weathering a temporary storm, Ms. Reese. Thorn Corporation has always been resilient." "Resilience is admirable," I conceded, leaning forward slightly. But my interest isn't in weathering storms. I invest in structures built to last. I'm looking for a solid foundation, not just a beautiful facade that could shatter under pressure. I watched him. He nodded, but a flicker of something uneasy crossed his face. He didn't understand the words, not yet. He was still trying to sell me a product. "We can provide you with all our financials," he offered, a little too quickly. "Complete transparency." "Transparency is a given," I said softly. "But some investments are more delicate than others. You can have something that looks perfect on paper, something exquisite, even. But if its core is compromised, it becomes a liability. A porcelain investment, you might say. Beautiful, but ultimately fragile." I let the word hang in the air between us. Porcelain. It was like watching a film in slow motion. The blood drained from his face. His eyes, which had been looking at me with a salesman's professional focus, suddenly widened. The polite mask of Liam Thorne, COO, began to crack. He was no longer seeing Alana Reese, the investor. He was seeing a ghost. His breath hitched. The glass of water in his hand trembled, rattling against the saucer. What did you say?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't smile. I just held his gaze, my expression unchanging. I said, "Some things are too fragile to be considered a sound investment." I leaned back in my chair, giving him no escape. "I learned that lesson a long time ago, here in Havenwood. Some people make promises they can't keep. They build cages, gilded though they may be, and expect the occupants to sing." The sweat was beading on his forehead now. The recognition was complete, a tidal wave of terror and memory crashing over him. This wasn't a business meeting anymore. It was an exorcism. He was looking at the woman he had abandoned, the girl he had called a liar, the life he had helped destroy. I could see the frantic calculations in his eyes. How is this possible? Where has she been? What does she want? "It's you," he breathed, the words stolen from his lungs. "It's me," I confirmed, my voice still calm, still level. "You look surprised. Did you really think I would just disappear? That you could throw me away and I would simply break?" He couldn't speak. He just stared, his mouth slightly agape, a man confronted by a past he had murdered and buried. I had him. The hook was set. The fear I saw in his eyes was more satisfying than any financial ruin. This was personal. This was the overture to the grand finale. I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice reverting to its cool, professional tone. "I've seen everything I need to see. I will not be investing." I walked out of the office, leaving him there, a pale, trembling specter in a glass tower, finally face to face with the ghost he had created. The annual Havenwood Charity Gala was the glittering apex of the town's social calendar. It was Marcus Thorne's stage, his yearly coronation where the wealthy and powerful of the city gathered to pay homage to their king. He was set to receive the Man of the Year award, a meaningless trophy that symbolized his absolute dominion over the town's narrative. This year it wasn't a coronation, it was an execution. I was there, in the audience, another face in the crowd. I wore a simple, elegant black gown, a stark contrast to the glittering jewels and garish silks around me. I was invisible, just as he had always wanted me to be. Across town, in our anonymous apartment that had served as our war room, Eleanor was at the helm. She was our digital god, her fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to unleash the storm. We were connected by a secure, encrypted earpiece. "All systems are green, Ava," her voice came, calm and steady in my ear. "The targets are locked, awaiting your signal." Marcus took the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. He beamed, soaking in the adoration like a withered plant drinking in the rain. He looked directly at Liam, who was seated at a front table, looking pale and gaunt, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for me in the shadows. Marcus placed his hands on the lectern, a benevolent sovereign addressing his loyal subjects. "My friends, my neighbors," he began, his voice dripping with false humility. To be named Man of the Year in a town like Havenwood, a town built on family, on integrity, It is the greatest honor of my life. I watched him, my heart a cold, steady drum. There was no rage, no fear, only a profound, chilling sense of purpose. This was the moment I had lived for, through decades of lonely nights and silent tears. "On my signal, Eleanor," I whispered, my lips barely moving. Marcus continued his speech, weaving a tapestry of lies about community, charity, and legacy. He spoke of building a better future for the children of Havenwood. As he reached the crescendo of his self-congratulatory monologue, I gave the order. "Now." "Initiating sequence," Eleanor replied. The two enormous screens flanking the stage, which had been displaying the gala's logo, flickered. The logo vanished. In its place, an image appeared. It was not a spreadsheet or a document. It was a high-resolution photograph of a small, tarnished silver locket resting on black velvet. A murmur went through the crowd. They were confused. It meant nothing to them, but it meant everything to Marcus. I watched his face. His smile faltered. His eyes widened in confusion, then in dawning horror. It was the locket I had been wearing the last night I saw him, the one he had ripped from my neck. Then came the sound, not the gala's orchestral music, but a hiss of static. And then, a voice. His voice. Not the smooth, charismatic baritone he was using at the lectern, but a voice twisted with venom and contempt. It was from a recording I had made that final, terrible night, on a tiny microcassette recorder my father had given me. The only thing of value I'd owned, a secret I had guarded for a lifetime. "You think you can trap me?" His recorded voice snarled, echoing through the silent, cavernous ballroom. "You and that thing inside you. You are nothing, a little porcelain doll that I can break whenever I please. I will ruin you. I will erase you. No one will ever believe a pathetic little gold digger. I will tell them you lost your mind. I will make sure that child is never born into this family. Do you understand me?" A collective gasp swept through the hall. People turned to stare at each other, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Marcus stood frozen at the lectern, his face ashen, a statue of a man watching his own soul being dissected in public. Liam had buried his face in his hands. Simultaneously, as his vile words still hung in the air, Eleanor unleashed the digital apocalypse. Her meticulously compiled dossier, every offshore account, every laundered dollar, every piece of evidence of fraud, blackmail, and corruption, was sent. It landed in the inbox of every major journalist in the state, every board member of his company, and most importantly, a dedicated task force at the FBI and the IRS. Phones began to vibrate and light up across the ballroom as the first news alerts broke through the stunned silence. Thorne Corporation under federal investigation for massive fraud scheme. The whispers had become a roar, but I had saved one final devastating blow. The audio faded, the image of the locket dissolved, and new text began to scroll up the screens. It was a sworn affidavit. The letters were large, clear, and damning. It detailed years of psychological torment, of witnessing his crimes, of living in fear. It was a full confession, corroborating everything. And at the bottom of the document, a signature was projected for all to see, a final, unimaginable twist that broke the last support beam of his world. It wasn't my signature. It read, Amelia Thorne, his wife, Liam's mother, the silent, elegant woman who had stood by his side for 40 years. After a lifetime of suffering, I had found a way to reach her, not with threats, but with the promise of liberation. I had given her a voice, and she had chosen to use it, providing the final, irrefutable nail for her husband's coffin. The room erupted. The facade of Havenwood's high society shattered into a million pieces. Marcus Thorne stood alone on the stage, stripped bare. He was no longer a king, no longer a myth. He was just a small, wicked man, exposed and ruined under the bright, unforgiving lights of his own Vanity Fair. I stood up and walked toward the exit, not looking back. The fire of my revenge had burned itself out, and in the quiet that remained, I could finally feel the cool, clean air of freedom. The first broadcast came on just as Eleanor was pouring me a cup of tea, the steam rising like a ghost in the quiet apartment. The television screen flickered to life, Not with the usual drone of evening programming, but with the frantic electric energy of breaking news. A local channel, one from Havenwood. The anchor, a woman whose perfectly coiffed hair seemed at odds with the chaos in her eyes, stared into the camera. We are coming to you live from the Havenwood Grand Ballroom, where the annual Thorn Philanthropy Gala has been thrown into absolute turmoil. We are getting reports, still unconfirmed, that Marcus Thorn, the titan of industry and the man being honored here tonight, has been taken into custody. I repeat, Marcus Thorn has been arrested. The camera swiveled, a dizzying pan across a scene of utter pandemonium. Tuxedos and evening gowns, which moments before had represented the pinnacle of Havenwood society, were now just the attire of a panicked, confused mob. Champagne flutes lay shattered on the marble floor. On the grand stage, under a banner that read, "A Pillar of Our Community," two uniformed officers were leading a man away. Marcus, his face, usually a mask of controlled charisma, was a canvas of disbelief and incandescent rage. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking directly at the camera, his eyes scanning, searching, as if he could burn through the lens and find me. Find the ghost who had done this. Eleanor set the tea down, her hand steady. She didn't look at me, but at the screen. "It started," she said, her voice a low, steady hum beneath the frantic noise from the television. "It's finished," I corrected her gently. The national news picked it up within the hour. The story was too perfect, too potent to ignore. The philanthropist exposed as a predator. The pristine image shattered by a last-minute bombshell. They played the clip Eleanor had broadcast on the gala's main screen over and over again. My voice, thin and trembling from decades ago, but my words, clear as a bell, a secret recording I had made in a moment of desperate self-preservation. And then, his voice. Marcus Thorn's true voice. Not the modulated baritone of his public speeches, but the guttural snarl of a predator, threatening me, threatening our unborn child. The audio was grainy, laced with static, but the malice was pristine. And this recording, a sharp-suited legal analyst on a 24-hour news network explained, while potentially facing admissibility challenges in court, was the catalyst. It was the match thrown on a pyre that, we are now learning, was already soaked in gasoline. He gestured to a screen behind him, which now displayed a complex web of financial charts and offshore company names. Released concurrently with the audio was a massive data trove, delivered anonymously to federal agencies and every major news outlet. It details a sophisticated, decades-long scheme of money laundering, fraud, and racketeering, all funneled through the very charities Mr. Thorn was so famous for supporting. The allegations are staggering. I watched, mesmerized. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't the hot, satisfying burn of revenge I had fantasized about for so long. It was something else entirely. A stillness. A profound, cleansing quiet that settled over me, muffling the noise of the world. The fire that had raged inside me for 40 years, the inferno that had consumed my youth and defined my lonely middle age, was finally burning out. It hadn't left a barren wasteland of ash, as I had always feared it would. It had cleared the land. It had left behind dark, fertile soil, ready for something new. "They're talking about Liam now," Eleanor murmured, drawing my attention back to the screen. A different channel was showing a photo of Liam, captured by a paparazzo as he was hustled out a side door of the ballroom, his face pale and drawn. His perfect world, the one built on his father's lies and my silence, had crumbled in the space of a single evening. "Sources close to the investigation," a reporter was saying, "indicate that Liam Thorn is being treated as a person of interest, not only in the financial crimes, but also in the alleged cover-up of his father's personal misconduct. The question everyone is asking is, how much did he know? And when did he know it?" I knew the answer. He knew everything. From the moment I had confessed it all to him, my face swollen with tears and my body trembling with a desperate, fragile hope. He knew, and he chose his father. He chose the lie. His downfall was not my primary objective, but it was a necessary consequence. He was not just a bystander. He was a gatekeeper to the gilded cage. the one who had turned the final lock. Days turned into a week. The story didn't fade. It mutated, growing larger and more monstrous with each revelation. Journalists descended on Havenwood like vultures, picking apart the carcass of the Thorne legacy. They interviewed townspeople, whose reactions were a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. "I just can't believe it," said a woman who ran a local bakery, a bakery that had received a generous small business grant from a Thorne charity. "Marcus was always so good to this town. He practically built the new library." There were whispers, a retired groundskeeper from the Thorne estate admitted, his face obscured by shadow. Things you'd hear, the way staff would be hired and fired, the way Mrs. Thorne, Amelia, became smaller, quieter. You just learned not to ask questions. Amelia. My heart ached for her. Her sworn affidavit, released by Eleanor as the final crushing blow, was a quiet testament to her own long winter. In it, she corroborated my story, not in detail, but in essence. She spoke of Marcus's volatile temper, his cruelty, his ability to charm the world while terrorizing his own home. She had been another doll in his collection, kept on a higher shelf perhaps, but a doll nonetheless. Her statement gave my old, forgotten claims a credibility they had never been afforded. It was the word of one of his own, a Thorne, turning against the patriarch. And then the think pieces began. Psychologists analyzed Marcus's narcissistic personality disorder on daytime television. Sociologists wrote articles about the collective blindness of communities that benefit from a wealthy patron's largesse. The story was no longer just about me or Marcus. It had become a parable, a modern folktale about the monster who hides in plain sight. Eleanor managed the digital fallout with the precision of a master tactician. She watched the online forums, the social media trends. At Thorne. Takedown was trending for 3 days straight. She filtered the information, showing me only what was necessary, protecting me from the vitriol and the sensationalism. She was my shield, just as I had been her sword. One evening, about 2 weeks after the gala, Eleanor switched off the television for good. The apartment fell into a sudden, welcome silence. The only sound was the distant hum of the city. "It's done," she said, looking at me, her eyes clear and full of a quiet understanding that went beyond our shared mission. "The initial wave is over. Now it's just lawyers and court dates. It'll grind on for years, but the empire is gone. He's finished." I nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a story about someone else. The woman who had meticulously planned this, the woman who had nurtured her hatred like a rare and poisonous flower, felt like a stranger. The roaring fire was gone. And in the silence it left behind, another voice, one I had suppressed for a lifetime, was beginning to whisper. It was the voice of a mother. That night, after Eleanor had gone to bed, I sat at the small kitchen table. The city lights cast a soft, impersonal glow across the room. I took out a single sheet of fine, cream-colored paper and a pen. The pen felt heavy in my hand, weighted with the words I had never said, the story I had never told to the one person who deserved to hear it most. My hand trembled as I began to write. To my dearest Sarah. The name felt foreign and sacred on my lips, a secret prayer I had only ever whispered into the darkness. Writing it down felt like an act of defiance, a claim. You were mine. You are mine. I don't know where to begin, or perhaps I do. I begin with your eyes. In the few fleeting moments I was allowed to hold you, I memorized them. They were the color of a stormy sea, full of a wisdom that seemed ancient and profound. I knew even then that you were a soul far older and stronger than mine. I wonder if you kept that color. I wonder if your daughter, my Eleanor, has them too. Sometimes, when she looks at me, I think I see a flicker of you there. Forgive me for starting there, with a memory that must mean nothing to you. But for me, it was everything. It was the anchor that held me through the long, desolate years. I am writing to you tonight not to make excuses for the choices I made, but to try, finally, to explain them. to tell you the story you were never told. I fell in love once, a foolish, girlish love that felt like a fairy tale. His name was Liam. He was handsome and kind, and he lived in a world of impossible wealth and privilege. To a girl like me, from the dusty side of town, he was a prince, and his father, Marcus Thorne, was the king, a king who ruled his kingdom with a charming smile and an iron fist. He called me his porcelain doll. At first I thought it was a term of endearment. I was young. I didn't understand that to him, a doll was something to be possessed, to be displayed, and ultimately, to be broken, if it ever showed a will of its own. I won't poison this letter with the full, sordid details of what he did to me. It is a darkness you were never meant to carry. Suffice it to say, he saw my spirit as a challenge, my love for his son as an intrusion, and he set about with methodical cruelty to dismantle me, piece by piece. He isolated me, manipulated Liam, and used my family's financial dependence on him as a weapon. He turned my fairy tale into a gilded cage and then into a torture chamber. When I found out I was pregnant with you, my sweet girl, it was the most terrifying and beautiful moment of my life. You were a secret, a tiny fluttering spark of hope in an endless night. I believed you would be my salvation. I believed that if I told Liam the truth, told him you were coming, he would see his father for the monster he was. He would save us. I was wrong. The love I had for him was no match for the lifetime of poison Marcus had poured into his son's ear. Liam didn't save me. He condemned me. He called me a liar, a manipulator, a madwoman. He sided with his father, and in that moment, my heart didn't just break, it turned to dust. They cast me out of Havenwood with nothing but the clothes on my back and you, a secret heartbeat beneath my own. I ran. I was so scared, Sarah. I was scared of them, of what they would do if they ever found out you existed. Marcus Thorne was not a man who left loose ends. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would see you not as a grandchild, but as a threat, a liability, a piece of evidence that needed to be erased. The decision to give you up was not a decision at all. It was a tearing of my own soul. I held you for 6 hours in a sterile hospital room in a city whose name I can no longer remember. I sang you all the lullabies my mother ever sang to me. I told you I loved you more than the sun and the moon, and I prayed to a God I no longer believed in, that you would be safe, that you would be loved, and that you would forgive the ghost of a mother who had to disappear to save your life. I gave you up, not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to let you be raised in the shadow of that family's evil. I chose your life over my own happiness. It is the only good and selfless thing I have ever done. For 40 years, I lived in a self-imposed exile. I was a ghost, haunted by your face, by the memory of your warmth in my arms. I worked menial jobs. I kept to myself. I let the anger and the grief curdle inside me, turning into a hard, cold stone of vengeance. And then, a lifetime later, a letter found me. A letter telling me you were gone. The pain of that news was indescribable. It was the reopening of a wound I had only pretended was healed. But the letter also brought me a gift. It brought me Eleanor, your daughter. Oh, Sarah, if you could see her, she has your strength, your intelligence. She is a warrior, a brilliant, fierce young woman who had already sensed the darkness in the Thorne family long before I ever came into her life. Finding her was like finding a missing piece of my own heart. Through her, I found the strength to stop being a victim and become a strategist. Together, we planned. We wove a web of technology and memory, of digital evidence and psychological warfare. We took the name he had given me, the porcelain doll, and we used it to shatter his world. And we won. We won completely. The Thorne Empire is in ruins. Marcus and Liam will face justice, not just for what they did to me, but for decades of corruption. The world finally knows the truth. But as I sit here tonight, in the quiet aftermath of it all, I know that this victory is hollow without your forgiveness. I did it all for you, Sarah. Every step of the plan, every moment of risk, was to honor the life you should have had, the justice you deserved. I needed to burn down their world so that the ground could be clean for your daughter to build a new one. I will never know if this letter will reach you, if souls can read words written on paper, but I am writing it anyway. I am asking you, my beloved child, my long-lost daughter, to forgive me. Not as an excuse, but as a final release. Forgive me for not being strong enough to keep you, and know that every day of my life since has been a testament to my love for you. You are free now, my sweet girl, and because of you, and because of your incredible daughter, I think I might be too. All my love, for all of time, your mother Ava. I folded the paper carefully, my hands no longer trembling. I creased it once, then twice, tucking all the pain and all the love into its neat, white corners. As I did, I felt it, a tangible shifting inside my chest, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, the dense, heavy burden of unspoken grief and unrelenting guilt, simply lifted. It floated away, dissolving into the quiet air of the apartment. I was no longer defined by my secrets. I was no longer the sum of my trauma. The ink had barely dried on that letter when the seasons began to turn. The chill of a long autumn gave way to the quiet slumber of winter, and then to the first, tentative blush of spring. The world outside our apartment window began to wake up, and with it, so did I. One morning, Eleanor came into the living room with a brochure in her hand and a familiar, determined glint in her eye. "I'm tired of this city," she announced. "The air is gray. The memories are gray. We need a garden." And so, we left. We left the cold, modern apartment that had served as our war room, a place of shadows and secrets. We drove for hours away from Havenwood and its ghosts, away from the lingering stain of the Thorn name. Eleanor had found a place for us. A small, unassuming house, painted a cheerful, buttery yellow, nestled in a quiet town where no one knew our names. It wasn't grand, it wasn't imposing, it was perfect. The story ends here, not in a courtroom, not in a news report, but on the warm, splintery wooden planks of a porch swing. Eleanor bought it for me. She said every grandmother deserves a porch swing. The chain creaks a little, a rhythmic, gentle sound that has become the new soundtrack of my life. The house came with a garden, or rather, the promise of one. Right now, it's a chaotic tangle of weeds and overgrown rose bushes, a wild testament to years of neglect. But we see the potential. We spend our afternoons out here, sipping iced tea, our feet up on the railing, planning. "I'm thinking tomatoes along that back fence," Eleanor says, pointing with her glass. "And a whole bed of herbs right by the kitchen door. Basil, rosemary, mint for our tea. Lavender," I add, my voice soft. "I've always wanted to grow lavender, for the smell." "Lavender it is," she agrees with a smile. "We'll need to do a lot of work to clear it out first. It's a mess." "I don't mind a mess," I say, looking out at the tangled green. "It's honest. It's real." We talk like this for hours. We talk about the future, something I hadn't dared to do for most of my life. We talk about what color to paint the guest room, whether we should adopt a dog, what books we want to read. We don't talk about Marcus or Liam or the trial that is slowly grinding its way through the legal system hundreds of miles away. Their names have no power here. They are part of a different story, a different life. And the past is a closed book, tucked away on a high shelf. Its lessons have been learned, its ghosts have been confronted, and they have finally been laid to rest. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, as the sun sets and paints the sky in hues of orange and violet, I think about all the names I have been called: the porcelain doll, the tragic girl, the liar, the exile, the vengeful strategist. They were all costumes I was forced to wear, roles I had to play to survive. But sitting here, with the gentle breeze on my face and Eleanor's quiet, steady presence beside me, they all fall away. I am not the porcelain doll, beautiful but fragile, made to be owned. I am not the exile, banished and broken, living in the shadows. I am Ava, and for the first time in my very long life, I am free. My story is just one of millions. There are so many others who have been silenced, whose strength has been mislabeled as madness, whose truth has been buried under layers of power and influence. Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. If my story has taught me anything, it's that no cage can hold a determined spirit forever, and no secret can withstand the power of a voice that refuses to be silenced. What part of your own story are you ready to tell? Let me know in the comments below.